Okay, good morning. You there, Christopher?
Is it just me and you?
Yeah, it's me and you and Catherine and Sammy watching the recording. So,
Got it.
okay, good. We may, I don't know, we may get done early today. See what's happening. You want to open in prayer?
Can you repeat that?
You want to open in prayer?
Oh, sure.
Okay.
Dear God, thank you for this day. Thank you for this cycle flowing well. I pray that as we work on our work and our homework, that we just be able to prioritize and focus. We pray for everyone affected by COVID. We pray for the school and how they handle the situation. Um, and just continue to bless us, keep us safe and healthy. In your name we pray. Amen.
Amen. Good. Thank you. Let me use my other glasses for this. Okay, this is class 4 of 7. Didn't have class 4 last week. It's class 4 of 7. Next week, Nara Newcomer is going to speak to us, and she's the UMKC Miller Nichols Library music chief librarian for the music library. So she was actually at the same school Sammy was at once upon a time. So Sammy and Nara know each other, and so that'll be fun. She's got a lot of information about the library and what's there. The Miller Nichols Library is a fabulous library for doing research in music research. So at some point when it reopens, you're going to want to get down there and check it out. For next week, read through chapter 7 of the Wingle. If you haven't already finished the book, chapter 7 of the Wingle book for next week. All right. Okay, let's look at I've corrected the homework through up to what was due. So there are 4 assignments there. The abstract, also called a précis. A précis is, you'll hear précis, but generally people say abstract. The abstracts, a couple things about this as we continue to work through some of the stuff. When you submit your assignment, would you actually upload the Word doc instead of just cutting and pasting the text? And the reason for that is if you upload a Word doc, I can actually pull up tools that'll help me grade it on the spot. I'll be able to make marks on the paper within Canvas. And if you just paste in the text, those aren't available. So I can do a much better job grading. So
do you want me to resubmit?
Yeah, that'd be great.
Because so, I just put it in the text entry.
Yeah. So and I know I'm talking to Sammy and Catherine too. Sammy, you're fine. I got yours in the Word doc form. Catherine, if you could resubmit as a Word doc. Any things that you actually, this assignment and the ones to follow, if you could resubmit as Word docs, then I can actually deal with it. And it's better to get used to that now, because when it comes time to your paper, you absolutely have to submit that as a Word document, because there's no way I can wade through it in Canvas unless it's in that form. So, I mean, I can, but I can't do anything with it. So, so if you would, that'd be great. That way you can get my comments directly on the paper. At some point in your abstract, you should state exactly what it is that the reader of the paper stands to gain from engaging your research. So and I want to just talk briefly about this. Your research paper, at the undergraduate level, a research paper will be like a biography of Bach. And you say, okay, this is when he was born, this is when he died, here are the places he worked, here are some of his major compositions. And so it's informative. It's a research paper that's informative. For this class and for your work as a master's candidate, your papers should be master's level thinking. And so you always want to be thinking in terms of synthesizing information that you already know. So one of the themes that I've talked about in this class and other classes, in this class as an example, is the idea that music history is a movement of with a focus on God, to a focus on monarchs, to a focus on humanity, men. I just say men. God to monarchs to men in short term. I haven't read that anywhere. No one's ever commented on it to me. It's just after years of doing this stuff and studying, it became apparent to me that the first 1,000 years of music history is about God. So the thing that drives composers to even bother writing down their music is that they're preserving it for posterity. And so without the catalyst of trying to worship God, and then also under Charlemagne trying to trying to standardize the church services and then move that information out across Europe to unify a very ununified group of little fiefdoms, all speaking different languages. I mean, the church wanted to bring all of this under the same umbrella, and that is the kind of the peak of the God part of God to monarchs to men. And it was after that there was the plague hit in the 1300s, 1317 or whenever it was. There was a 100-year war in there between England and France. There was a famine, the same century, where people weren't getting enough to eat. But after the plague, a couple of years of plague, it basically wiped out 30 to 40% of the population. I mean, your chances, the difference between the plague we're in right now and the plague that happened in the 1300s was that if you got the plague in the 1300s, you almost assuredly were going to die from it. There wasn't any recovery from that. Maybe a handful of people, but the vast majority of people died, and they died within 2 or 3 days. It was nasty, nasty stuff. And what resulted of that was that people said, well, maybe God is not the answer. God was supposed to save them, and theology being what it was and the church being what it was didn't have any answers. And so there was a move towards this idea that maybe we need to trust the guy in charge of the kingdom, the local realm, instead of trusting God. And it's not the church lost power as much as power was gained within the monarchy, people that were ruling. And so now we're into the age of God to monarchs. And as the monarchs take control, and in some cases like Louis XIV and some of these other, matter of fact, most of the Louis claimed to be God on earth, the music shifts to the point where some of these courts become as or more powerful than the church, Catholic Church. So God to monarchs, and then to men, right at the we would see the seeds of humanism planted in the Notre Dame. So they build Notre Dame, 1163 they started. And so you have Leonin and Periton, and the reason I can say that it's the seeds of humanism It's for the first time composers are actually signing off on their works. So up till Landon and Perrotin, it's very rare that we know who wrote what. But after Landon and Perrotin, people are signing their works because it becomes important that the work I'm producing for the church is being recognized as coming from me. I mean, that's how they were looking at it. So instead of being anonymous, church music starts to be composed by someone. And then as that happens, of course, we have all sorts of information on composers after Landon and Perrotin, virtually none to speak of except for maybe Hildegard beforehand. And that's a fluke. The fact that we know about Hildegard von Bingen is simply because we have the records from the Abbey. Otherwise, we wouldn't know she wrote what she wrote. So, but after the 1150 to 1200, then we know who these composers are, and it becomes even more important in the 1300s, 1400s. We start to know about their families, the biographies. By the time we get to Bach, we know his wives and his kids and what he had for lunch. And so there's this dramatic shift that goes from God to the focus being on monarchs, to the focus being on men and women producing music. So I have never seen this in a book. So someday maybe I'll write a book, though I doubt it. But the point is that if I were going to write a paper on this, I would want to write in such a way that this is information that I'm adding to the current canon of knowledge about music history. So I'd want to discuss this in a way that says, first of all, people aren't going to find it as a theme, at least that I've been able to find, a theme in a history book. So I need to write in an authoritative way that makes the claim that this is exactly what's happening, and then give examples for that. So my thesis would be something like the progression of music, Western music, from the time of Christ to the present, is a movement from a focus on God to ultimately a focus on man. So that might be my thesis, and then I would go back and then try to demonstrate that through different sources and different writings, maybe source documents from composers of different times. But the point is this: your paper should move beyond informative. It should move beyond just defining what something is. It should be something that says, here is this concept, and I'm going to take this concept and I'm going to apply it to this situation in a new way that really hasn't been dealt with before, and then write from that kind of aspect. Does that make sense?
Yes. So a question, as I look for a sticky note to write down what you're saying. How would that, I understand how that looks like in the research paper.
Mm-hmm.
How do we use that within like the context of the article we submit or the Wikipedia article? Because Wikipedia is very much not, here's a situation and apply it, here is what it is. So
Right.
And the second part of that, I feel that when I've been like writing or gathering information, I keep having in mind like the article or the Wikipedia in my mind rather than the research paper. So,
Well, my third point after this was my second point. I'm going to skip the second point. Actually, I'm going to you need to be writing to your audience. Okay, so for this class, and certainly for the other master's papers, if I'm teaching the class, I'm going to ask you to let's say we're talking about 20th century music, because I'm teaching a 20th century music class next semester. If you are writing about 20th century music, what I'm going to look for is original thought on an existing topic would be fine. So you might be writing about minimalism and some of the composers of minimalism, why they wrote minimalism, or how that style, I mean, the style of minimalism, basically, it grows out of a desire to write music to listen to while the composers were taking illegal drugs. They were taking hallucinogenics, and they wanted something to underscore that. That's where it starts. That's where the whole idea of minimalism starts. Of course, it grows into now film scores are written in minimalistic style. But so the crunching. Do you hear something crunching? I'm getting a crunching sound over here. That's weird. Okay, that's kind of okay. Still there. Try muting your mic just 1 second. Oh, that took care of it. Okay. Yeah. Okay. I was getting feedback or something. So, but you want to write to your audience. So you might remember you're going to write this big long tome of a paper. And so in that paper, you're going to cover multiple things. You're probably not going to take your paper and submit that to Wiki. It'd just be too long. But there's going to be some aspect of your paper, in your case, Frisson. So you're talking about Frisson. So there's an aspect of your paper where you talk about that and you define it before you get into maybe application or some interesting ideas about it or observations that you've seen that you're supporting with other documentation. But maybe that definition of Frisson and some examples of that becomes the basis of your article. So you might have a 12-page paper and only 3 pages of that paper is what ends up being moved to Wikipedia. Does that make sense? Yeah. Okay. All right. So let's see. At some point, I think I've already said this, but I'm going to say it again. At some point in your abstract, you should state exactly what it is the reader of the paper stands to gain from engaging in research. Bring your thesis statement into the abstract. If you do that, then the abstract is going to make sense to me. Remember, the purpose and the focus of an abstract is to allow me to read 400 or 500 words concerning your paper, and it lets me know if this is a paper I actually want to spend the time reading. So you should have the thesis statement in there somewhere, or some form of it. Oh,
right. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Sorry. Okay. So with my abstract that we resubmitted by yesterday, by 2 days ago, can we change that then?
Sure.
Okay, because I keep writing it like a summary rather than, yeah.
Think of an abstract as an ad.
Okay.
It's less a summary and more an ad. You're trying to give a reason to the person who's going to read it, the reason they should read it. So this is why you should read it. It's not, this is why you should read the paper. It's, this paper is about the following things and tries to answer this big existential question, is basically what you're trying to do with an abstract. Okay?
Can we say phrases like this paper?
You actually, as you write, you could say this article or this paper. It's, you want to get away from saying I plan to show or I will show. So take I out of it and just put talk about the paper as a paper of its own, its entity. Okay, research papers at a scholarly level it's just, we know that you're the one that's writing it. We look at the author, but quite often it's 2 or 3 or 4 or 6 or 8 authors.
Right.
Usually there's multiple people writing the paper. And so the paper ends up being an amalgamation of thought from different articles that have been written. Obviously, if you're taking information from other sources, that was written by people too. So ultimately, it's by a person or set of persons, multiple people. And so that's assumed, but we don't need to draw attention to that. We want to talk about the paper and what the paper is going to provide to the person who's reading it. So as you write, don't refer to I. Normally you would not refer to I.
Okay.
So,
Right. Can I ask another question? You mentioned something I had a question about. When I was looking at my sources, one of the, well, actually, like 2 or 3 of the sources had like 4 or 5 different writers,
yes.
and it was like journal articles. Do we, in like the Turabian bibliography, and I guess this is just a bibliography question, do we write down all the names of the people?
That's actually covered in the manual for writers, term papers, etc.
Okay, I have that on my desk. Great.
Yeah, look it up in there, and it'll tell you exactly how to format. I'm not trying to dodge the question.
No, we're trying to monopolize on time. I get it.
Well, and then between that book and the Calvary, the 2019 revised Calvary style guide, that will give you the information you need to know. And
Right.
so again, not trying to dodge the question, but there will be multiple questions like that. And I want to get you into the Turabian book. Remember, Turabian didn't come up with Chicago Manual of Style. She's just the one that's discussing how to apply it. So look at the Turabian book, the latest Turabian book, and look at the Calvary style guide, and that'll tell you how to handle those things. You're going to have, that's just the first question on a bibliography of many that you should have. So as you're accumulating sources, you're going to find that it might be a recording. You know, in the case Catherine said, what do I do about recordings? Well, if you're doing a bibliography, if you're referencing recordings, you need to cite them. So if I say, Bach wrote Well-Tempered Clavier, and I don't have to cite Well-Tempered Clavier. Matter of fact, I don't have to cite anything in that because that's common knowledge. But if I say the so-and-so's recording of Well-Tempered Clavier shows a clear abandonment of proper Baroque style. Glenn Gould's Well-Tempered Clavier shows an adaptation or merging of styles between Baroque and 20th century performance practice. Then I need to cite the Glenn Gould recordings that I'm actually talking about. That's going to end up in the bibliography. So if you're using a recording as part of your commentary, then you do need to cite it. So there are journal articles, recordings. In the case of Sammy, she's out interviewing, collecting data from live people who are responding to her questionnaire. That has to be cited, but it's cited differently than maybe something else. So all of those questions can be answered in those books. You will probably even come across something that's not answered in the book, at which case my answer to you is look at something similar and cite it the same way. So if you come across a situation, don't make it up. If there's clear direction on how to cite a particular thing, like a magazine article, a journal article, a recording, an interview, a YouTube video, all of those things, those are all clearly discussed in those two sources. And so use those for your citation. And then beyond that, then you do the best you can, understanding the other ways that you've sourced, the way you've sourced other documents. So, makes sense? Okay, bibliography. Let's talk about that. Okay, the first thing is the directions for your paper is in the syllabus. It's not in the assignments, it's in the syllabus. So the syllabus is like a contract between the school and the student. So I try to, I write the syllabus. In this case, the core of the syllabus was written 6 years ago. So I have to go back and read through the syllabus every time I teach the course because I forget some of the stuff I put in there. But here are things from the syllabus that you should know, and you should go back and read it also. The syllabus says write a formal scholarly paper, research paper, to 10 to 12 pages in length. Now, I've actually given you the word count because that will get you to 10 to 12 pages. You're supposed to use proper formatting and citations, and the bibliography is supposed to be at least 15 sources. Okay, so if you've turned in the bibliography, and you all have, and you've turned in these other assignments, which you all have, I'm reminding you to go back and read the syllabus, which you all haven't, because the syllabus says clearly 15, at least 15 sources, because not all of you submitted 15 sources.
Yeah, no, I didn't. I didn't realize
Now,
that. Sorry.
I'm not asking you. The reason for this is important. A scholarly paper written off of 2 sources is not a scholarly paper.
Well, I put more than I put more than 2, but
No,
yeah.
you had more than 2, but I'm just making a point.
No, yeah.
A scholarly paper. Now you may not quote all 15 sources, but you should be doing enough research that you're going to multiple sources to gather your information.
Right.
So, and truly, when you're doing a scholarly paper, people are going to flip over and look at your bibliography. They're trying to decide whether or not your paper is truly scholarly. They're going to look at your sources. And if you have 3 or 4 sources, they're going to say undergraduate research paper. If you have 15 or 16 or 20 sources, they're going to say, okay, this person's well read. They've actually done the research. You go, oh yeah, he really did the research on this. Well, what that means is that you looked at multiple sources, came up with multiple ideas, pulled all this stuff together from all sorts of different places, and you synthesized it into a new discussion that hasn't happened. That's what you're doing. So 15 sources. Your presentation is a formal presentation, 15 to 20 minutes long. And we'll try to, I think today we'll have time to talk about your presentation. Understand that in the past, I've taught this as a 15, 16-week course. And the stuff that we're talking about today on citations and abstracts and all that, I know we're doing it after the fact, after you've handed in your stuff. Normally, this occurs before you hand in your stuff. So I'm giving you information after the fact. I understand that, but it's the only way we can get everything done in 8 weeks, 7 classes. So just be aware that as I'm telling you this stuff, you should be going, oh, I didn't do that with my abstract. Well, go back and adjust your abstract so that it has some of the information I'm talking about. Make sense?
It does.
And then remember, and you'll hear me say this over and over. This is not an undergraduate research paper. Undergraduate research papers are not the same as academic um, master and doctoral level research papers. Take your time on this, write well, and write thoroughly. Okay. Some writing, not all of you, but some of you are kind of, it looks like you're, not all of your writing, but, and I'm not talking to you specifically necessarily. I'm talking to the class in general. When I read your writing, I shouldn't get the sense that you slapped it together in 30 minutes spare time, because I am getting some of that from some of you, that you just kind of slapped it together, didn't really think it through, and didn't proofread it. Okay, so all of that stuff you should be doing. This is a master's level writing course, and you should write in that style. So you don't ever want to be embarrassed for writing that you're submitting, either for publication or for grading. And the way that you do that is to make sure you don't write something that you would be embarrassed about. So take your time, write well, write thoroughly, proofread your writing. Allow me to give you some input and then apply that input. I don't expect you to be a great writer coming into the course, but I do want you to be a very competent writer coming out of the course. So if there's some simple things. If all your sentences are the same size, that gets really fatiguing to read. You know what I mean? Or if they're structured the same way. Or if you start a sentence with I blah, 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 and then 2 sentences later, you use the same opening, I blah, blah, blah. So I intend to, and then 2 sentences later, I intend to do this. Reword stuff so that it makes for engaging reading. The cool thing about English and a thesaurus is that English is loaded with multiple words meaning the same thing or almost the same thing. And a thesaurus can help you find those multiple words. So you want to avoid certainly using the same word twice in the same sentence. If there's any possible way to do it, and usually there is. But by the same token, you don't want to have that, you don't want to use the same word to describe something over and over again in a paragraph or in a paper, because it gets really tiring to read. It's not interesting. So write in a way that's not only communicating the information you're trying to communicate, but write in a way that's also engaging. And the way you write in an engaging manner is to spend time on your writing. If it's slapdash and you're just throwing some thoughts on a paper, and then you don't go back and rewrite that so that it is a compelling read for your audience, you're going to lose your audience. It becomes boring. So don't write in boring manners. So that's for all of us, you guys, and for me too. I work on this even when I'm writing an email. I try to write in a scholarly voice, not a condescending voice, but a scholarly voice, a voice that says, here's an email. I value the fact that you're going to read this email, so I'm going to try to write it in a way that makes it interesting. Because I know you're reading a lot of emails, and I want to have this, at least this email, be something that's worth reading. So, and I hope you see that even on short emails that I send to you. You'll see that I've spent some time. Sometimes they're pretty terse, 3 words. But when I'm writing anything of substance, I try to take my time, and I labor over emails. I don't just dash them off. Okay, so get beyond basic definitions or history in your paper. Talk about the impact of some aspect of your subject. Again, it should be synthesis of information and not an encyclopedia entry. Wikipedia is an encyclopedia entry. That's only part of your paper. Okay, so next week, today is the 14th. So I'm sorry, this week, Wednesday, your wiki article based on your research paper is due, right? That's this Wednesday. Wow. Okay. And then, and that's going to be the easy part of writing your paper. So you may not have your paper complete, but you should have the wiki article based portion of it complete. So Christopher, in your case, you're writing about Frisson, and you probably have all these wonderful ideas that you want to bring up about it, maybe specific pieces or the application of Frisson to animals or whatever it is that you're going to do. But the actual part of the paper where you're talking about what Frisson is, and maybe some general stuff about it up front, that would be your submission.
Right. I already narrowed it down. I know what I'm going to submit for it.
Okay, good. So, so you guys get that to me by the 19th, which is 15, 16, 17. What is that? The 19th. What is the 19th? Oh, Saturday. Okay, so you have Saturday midnight when that's due, right? Saturday midnight. And I just lost my notes. Here we go. Then the following week, your wiki article, you're going to submit it. So we need to, we'll talk about, we'll do that next week. We'll talk about how to obtain a wiki account and become a wiki researcher and how to submit your article. So, and the grade for that is the fact that you've submitted it, not that they've accepted it. We can't control whether or not they accept it. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't, but we can control what we do on our end. So we'll get that out. And then of course, the following week on the 5th, your research paper and presentation are due. And I'm looking forward to that. So that'll be a fun day. They're all fun days. Okay, questions? We're going to continue in chapter 4. We're back into Wingle, and this is mechanics. Most of Wingle is mechanics. Some is style, but a lot of it is mechanics. And we want to talk about first writing your paper. And this is it took me all the way to the doctorate before I really found how to write a paper so that it's not only painless, but it could actually be an enjoyable process. So I wish I had more time to write. I'm not a natural writer, and it's not that I love writing. I don't love writing. It's laborious for me. It takes Herculean effort for me to write something of any consequence and of any length, because I have to work at everything. It doesn't come natural. But the part of doing the research and coming up with the ideas, I love. That part of academic writing is something that really excites me. Okay, so this is how I approach writing when I have to write an article or a report or or even if I'm writing, if I were writing for a book, I would follow the same steps. So the first thing is the outline. Okay, so design a clear outline. You have to decide within that outline what's going to be included and what's going to be left out. When you're doing research, when I wrote the paper, and I told you this already, but I'll remind you, when I wrote the paper that you're writing now, that is for my research and bib class, I had over 100 books that I had checked out from the library. And I didn't cite all of them. I cited many of them. I can't remember how big my bibliography was. It was massive, because I went back and read a ton of stuff from a ton of books. And that's that's where I accumulated the information I needed to write on a unique aspect of vocal training. So but in all of that, as you're reading through all these different sources, you have to figure out what you're going to leave in and what you're going to leave out. And what you leave out is just as important as what you leave in, because you want to write concisely, and it's very easy to get bogged down in all this other information that's really not necessary to your thesis. So keep your thesis in front of you, know what it is that you're writing about, and avoid adding fluff or filler. The danger, of course, in saying 2,500 words or saying 12 pages is that you write to fill the pages. Scholarly writing, often that is the case. They're going to say to you, we need 8,000 to 10,000 words for this chapter in this book. That's what we need, 8,000 to 10,000 words. And so the challenge is, how do I give that person 8,000, 9,000, 10,000 words and avoid the tendency in undergraduate school that we have to add words for the sake of getting to the 8,000 words. Instead, you should have enough information that you should be going, how am I going to get everything I want to say into 10,000 words? So you should be thinking 10,000 words, 8 to 10,000 words. I don't think I can get it all into 10,000 words. What am I going to have to leave out? That's where you should be in your research. You got a lot to say, and you're saying, okay, I got to say it for this chapter in this book, but I'm going to go on. I'll have to write my own book so I can get the rest of my thoughts into a book, but I'm going to need a lot more than 10,000 words. That's where you should be with research. So don't think small, think big. The outline is a critical step. The outline, and don't skip the outline. Literally, once you have the outline, it's just a matter of filling in the words around it. But the outline is where you work out your ideas. It's where you work out exactly what it is that you do want to talk about. And it's where you bring in the actual research and quotes and charts. You're going to include charts. You want to have all that at the outline level. Yes.
I assume the answer is yes, but we can change our outline, right?
Oh, yeah.
Great,
yeah.
Because mine's going to look totally different, because
Yeah,
my abstract's going to look totally different, right?
That's why
not completely, but right.
Yeah. Yeah. In a perfect world, we'd be at week 5 in a 16-week semester. So, but we're not in a perfect world. We're at week 5 in an 8-week semester. So, I understand that time is of the essence, and you don't have a lot of time on this. Again, I took this class in 3.5 weeks, so I know what you're under. So, do not skip the outline step, and write a real outline. And we'll talk a little more about that. But first, I want to just mention topic and thesis. The most important part of your paper is your thesis. It's a topic sentence that represents the main point of the paper. This is the controlling idea of the entire paper. You should keep that in front of you while you're writing. A topic is a broad area of study, while a thesis is the precise point you want to make about the topic. The topic is frisson, or the topic is guitar pedals, or the topic is building community and inquires. That's your topic. The thesis statement needs to be a specific point that you're trying to make about your topic. Make sense? And the thesis is the most important part of your paper. That's what you're writing to. So make sure that you have a thesis statement, and make sure that you write to the thesis statement. Okay, so Christopher, what might be a thesis statement for your paper?
Well, I was coming from a very like, okay, here's Frisson, and then, okay, so this is gonna be really convoluted, right? Um, I was coming from the perspective of writing about Frisson, and I was focused more on the article than the paper. So it sounds way more scholarly. So I can't just say something like Frisson is this, this, and this. I have to find that situation and apply it. So maybe what I could do is say um, Frisson is, oh, I know. Comparing and contrasting Western music and non-Western music, what is inherently a musical expectation that causes frisson? What is just a product of culture? Maybe
Yeah,
that.
great. Yeah, that's cool. Yeah. So how much of it is inherent in the music, and how much of it is our learned cultural response?
Right.
Yeah, that's cool.
That's pretty good. I should do that. Yeah.
Yeah, that'd be an excellent point. So yeah, because you could look at if there's something inherent in the music, um, then anybody who listens to uh, this last night at about 1 o'clock in the morning, I came across the Ockingham
Uh-huh.
piece that is scored for 36 voices, and it is it's not very long. The piece is just a few minutes long, but in the middle, when you have all 36 voices singing this canon, and all this music is going on, it sounds like heaven. It's I'm sure when Ockingham wrote it, he thought, this is going to sound like heaven. Because it
Right.
sounds like there's 1,000 angels all singing praises to God. And it's really a moving piece. And it's a moving piece. I would think it would be a moving piece regardless of culture. I don't know for sure. You have to do the study on it. Um, but it had embedded in the piece. It's this very moving, 36 voices singing 36 different lines of music. Really amazing and very cool stuff. So, so is that learned or is that cultural? Is it cultural or is it inherent in the piece? That'd be a neat thing to explore. Okay, topic outline versus sentence outline. Topic outline is when you list words or phrases as your outline stuff. Okay, I'm going to do this or this phrase or this set of words, and okay, this will remind me of this. That's that kind of outline. A sentence outline is where you write actual sentences, and those are sentences that you're probably going to include in the body of your paper. For these kinds of papers, you should be writing sentence outlines. Okay? So your outline should say, it should be a full sentence, it should be well crafted, and it will be a sentence. In many cases, it's the lead sentence to the paragraph that follows from your writing. So that way, when you get done with your outline, you have a series of actual sentences, and those sentences then become the first sentences of each paragraph of your paper. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Very cool way to write, and it keeps you focused on topic, and it makes it much easier to write your paper from the outline. Okay, next, introduction. Your introduction to the paper, after you get your outline done, write your introduction. That's what you use to ease into your topic. It offers perspective. And in that introduction, you should announce your thesis. This paper, this paper explores the whatever. Okay. Then the body of the paper, you list your main ingredients in some logical order. Again, full sentences for your outline. And conclusion, if you write your intro and conclusion, at the same time you write your sentence outline, again, it aids writing the body of the paper. The conclusion is a recap of the main point. This paper has demonstrated blah, blah, blah. And then some memorable wrap up, something that, put a hook in it that that ties it all together and says, this is, for instance, okay, if I were writing about the Reformation, I'm writing about church music and the Reformation, and I talk about various different aspects to the Reformation. There were multiple Reformations going on. We had not just the rise of Protestantism. We had other sects, sects, Christian sects arising at the same time. And while the Germans were getting beat up by the Catholics, the Anabaptists were getting beat up by the Germans. So there's like lots of different skirmishes during the Reformation over this stuff. But one of the things that does come up in the Reformation is this idea of hymn singing in the vernacular. And so I'm writing on the Reformation, I'm writing on church music. I talk about the music of Luther and the Lutheran tradition. I talk about Calvinist tradition. I talk about the Anglican, the Church of England tradition. I talk about these different forms of music. And then I maybe my wrap up is there were multiple expressions of church music in the vernacular that occurred during the Reformation. One of the things that has come down to us is a rich history of this music in pieces such as Ein Festeberg, Mighty Fortress, the Lutheran hymn that we sing today, albeit in different form, but very, very similar. A lot of the same notes, the same words that have been translated from German. And my hook would be, in that case, something like, imagine the timelessness of God's word and praise and worship, that there would be a hymn in Festeberg that has survived 500 years in the church and is still a beloved hymn today. So that would be how I would try to end it, so that people would go, oh yeah, 500 years. That is a long time. 500 years from now, are we still going to be singing In Christ Alone? 500 years from now, are we still going to be singing Whom Shall I Fear? Chris Tomlin? Probably not that one. We might be singing In Christ Alone. We will be singing Amazing Grace. And we will be singing A Mighty Fortress. So, wow, that somebody could write something. It's mind-blowing that a human being could write something that 500 years later still captures the attention of human beings in terms of worship. So that's amazing. So I would try to bring that into a conclusion so that there's a memorable wrap-up. Finally, revising the outline. You should be revising the outline until the point where you actually sit down and start to write the paper. And I would even suggest that after you start to write the paper, you will be revising your outline. If you do your outline, then you write your intro, or you might want to write your conclusion first, and then you write your intro. At that point, you may need to rewrite your outline. Then as you start to write your paper, you may rewrite your outline some more, but keep that, let that outline breathe and have it be kind of alive so that you're responding to the research you're doing. Ideally, in a perfect world, in a 16-week class, you would do 3 or 4 weeks of intense research, then a week of outline writing, and then you would write your paper, or maybe 2 weeks of outline writing and then write your paper. We're doing the expedited version, and so a lot of this stuff has overlap, where you're doing research and writing the outline and writing the paper at the same time. I understand that. And that's not unusual. Sometimes you have to write stuff in a very short time frame. I'm just asking you to start to develop the habits of using the right skills to prepare for the paper. So this is much of this is about forming good habits. Okay, then when you write the draft, you shouldn't write your first draft should not be your final draft. It is a rare individual that can write a first draft that ends up being the final paper. And I can tell you, having read all of your papers, don't take offense to this, because I would say the same thing to myself, is that none of you are capable of writing a first draft that is a draft you should hand in as a final draft. It's the same for me. The same for me. What you want when you write your first draft, what you actually want is a brain dump. You don't want to get caught up. You don't want to. I dither when I write, and so I make a special point to have my first draft be a brain dump, so that I'm not laboring. I don't correct words. I don't spell check. I don't worry about grammar. I get down my thoughts without worrying about all of that mechanical stuff and trying to perfect the paper as I write. I don't do any of that. I just do a brain dump. And what I find is that when I'm in the writing process, if I get in and just start writing and the thoughts come, and I don't do anything to stop those thoughts, I don't stop to change the spelling of a word or to backspace, because I'm not a good typist. I don't backspace and try to retype the word. I do a dump, and I get as much information out as quickly as possible as my brain is releasing all these thoughts that I've had and all this research. And as I'm doing it, I'm just writing. And so in maybe a half hour, 45 minutes, I can crank out 400, 500 words. I mean, it just goes maybe in an hour, maybe 500 words or 1,000 words in an hour. I just brain dump. Okay. So, so stop being perfectionists on that first draft. Do set your word processor, if you're using Microsoft Word, do set your word processor for autosave, or you could use Google Docs or Teams, something that automatically saves your work. I find I don't know what it is. I don't mind prepping stuff in Google Docs and Microsoft, what is it? The online Microsoft stuff. But I do think it's easier to use a dedicated app like Microsoft Word on my computer. I just think it works better. But Microsoft Word doesn't automatically save unless you tell it to, and you can tell it to autosave. Because you don't want to think about, I better save my work. You want that to become an automatic thing. Let's see. So you're writing your draft, you're doing a brain dump, you're not laboring over it, you're just letting the thoughts flow. This is where you do musical examples. And so you might, if you got a printer that also is a copier, you throw the book on the copier, you take a Xerox of the page that you're going to use, you photocopy that, cut and paste. Maybe you're doing something in Sibelius or Finale that you're doing a score. Maybe you have a reduced score that you have that you're copying. That's all. You're collecting those things. The diagrams, the graphics, the tables. Make sure all that stuff is clear. You're bringing that in while you're writing that first initial draft. Footnotes. You footnote as you're doing the brain dump. You just develop maybe when I'm doing it, I have I still use index cards because I find that helps me. I find index cards help me collect my thoughts. And then what I'll do is as I'm gathering information, I'm jotting down stuff on index cards that I'm going to cite. And so then when I'm doing the outline and before I do the draft, the initial draft, I get those cards in an order that I want to use them. And then I could just number the cards 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And then what I'm doing when I'm writing the paper is I'm putting in a thought and I'll just put number 2, and writing another thought and I put number 3, and writing another thought and I put number 7. And what I'm referencing is the information on the cards that I will eventually bring into the paper. So I don't have to type all that stuff in. It's already on the cards. Makes sense? So again, keep things flowing. Remember, you don't have to footnote common knowledge. Common knowledge is when they were born, when somebody was born, when they died, Bach, how many children he had, what places he worked at in his life, the fact that he was an organ expert. I don't know. Maybe you'd want to footnote that, but that's questionable because I think most folks understand that he was, in the last part of his life, he was known more for his organ expertise than he was for his compositions. And maybe that's not common knowledge, but you understand what common knowledge is, and then what should be footnoted. If there's any question, just footnote it. It's not a big deal. Now, word processors, the footnote function in Word is brilliant, and use the footnote function in your word processors. Makes life so much easier to write a paper now than it was 20 or 30 years ago. So I remember the masters. I was writing a paper for the masters, and my wife was typing it up. This before we had kids, and I had to change a sentence. We got it all done. It was 50 some pages long. We had to change a sentence on one page in the middle of the paper. And this is before word processors. So what I had to do was I had to rewrite the page so that it had the right formatting so that I could get the change sentence in there without having to rewrite the paper. It was a nightmare. So all those issues have gone away. Hallelujah. So use the word processors. Bibliography. Include your cited and consulted works. It's okay to cite a work you cannot get access to that has been cited in another source. So if you have, for instance, Catherine's doing guitar pedals, and she reads a book that cites another book, and it is exactly the information she's looking for, and she can't get a hold of that book, or you don't have time to get a hold of the book within the scope of the time for the class. Cite that work and put, not the book it's in, but cite the work that the book has cited, and put not available for study. Okay, so that's how you're going to add that into your, and that's in the Winkle book. That's how you add it to your bibliography. Don't pad your bibliography with superfluous works. I know I'm asking for 15 sources. Don't pad it. Actually find 15 sources. It strengthens your final research. Okay. Now, revising and editing the draft. After you do your brain dump, Oh, by the way, get in the habit at the end of each session of writing, even though you have this automatic save function going on in your word processor. Every session, when you finish your writing for that point, send a copy of the paper to yourself, to your email address. Now you have a copy. I mean, you want to save it, but you're going to forget to do that. But save your drafts so that you can go back and refer to them if you need to, or go back and refer to them if something happens and your computer blows up. So now that a lot of stuff's being saved to the cloud, it's not as critical. But if you're writing in Microsoft Word, even if you have autosave on, if it's in Word and Word is on your computer, if your computer gets stolen or breaks down or the hard drive crashes, your work is lost. So get in the habit of emailing yourself your paper at the end of each working session. I started doing that actually in my research and bib class. And I ended up with, and I wrote it over a period of about a week and a half. And so I ended up with 10 or 12 copies of drafts in different forms. And I actually had to go back and refer to some of those as I continued to write the paper. So just get in the habit of doing that. Okay, so revising and editing the draft. Do not revise and edit your draft the same day that you've written it or the same day that you finished it. Stop, let it cool off, leave it for a few days, don't do anything with it, don't even think about it, and then after 2 or 3 days, then go back and begin the editing process. In the editing process, now you can go in and work on grammar, spelling, try to have it sound like a human being wrote it. And again, you're going to take advantage of the word processor. Find and replace, for instance, is a great tool. If you are in the process of writing your paper and you keep referring to something and you realize you misspelled it or you didn't capitalize it correctly, or there's some aspect of it and you think, oh, I got to go back and change all that in the paper, just use find and replace, right? You know about that? Everybody know about find and replace? Okay, good. Do you have any other favorite editing tools in a word processor?
This is just me. When I'm writing a rough draft, I like to highlight sentences I'm not sure I want to keep.
Yeah, good.
That way it's easier to, because when I go through one of my rough drafts, I'll go through it in sections before I do like an overall fixing up of it. So if I go through by like, okay, I'm going over all the red highlighted stuff, that's like, those are the sentences that I wasn't sure I wanted to keep, or it could be anything like that.
Okay, good.
Oh, and then the other thing is, when I write rough drafts, I have a bad habit of not adding bibliographies till the end and citations and all that. Like, I have the source, I'm just too lazy to write it in the moment. So if I know, hey, this is where I need to source this, I'll also highlight that so I know to come back to that and source up.
Yeah, good. Okay. Yeah, there's all sorts of cool stuff that you can do with word processors. Like I say, it's a whole lot easier to write now than it was 30 years ago, 40 years ago. Okay, you want to check your spelling and grammar. As I said before, there's no reason you should have any misspelled words on your paper. They may be the wrong words for what you're trying to say, but they shouldn't be misspelled. Use your spell checker. Check your grammar. Not all musical terms are in spell checker. If you haven't figured it out already, you're going to try to type a word that is not contained in your spell checker. So you can always add it, but make sure you add it correctly. Do your rewrite and fix all those mechanical things that you can. and assume that you are, as you're editing, assume at some point that you're reading the paper as somebody who is going to grade that paper. So you want to be real hard on yourself. Rewrite a sentence that's awkward or that doesn't make sense or that doesn't flow correctly. Take the time to rewrite it. Don't settle for slovenly writing, for second best writing. Printing, what you see is what you get. Functions on your, like Microsoft Word is great about this. They'll actually show you a page. Right now I'm teaching off of Word, the cloud version of Word. It's on my computer, and I've got, and of course it's set up WYSI, WYG, what you see is what you get. I can look at that and I see what the page looks like, and I know that if I take that and hit print, over here's my printer, and I would get a page that looks just like the document on my screen. So take advantage of that, because form is actually important when you write a paper, scholarly paper. Next, proofreading. Talked about this in the past. I'm going to say it again. Have another human being proofread your paper once you get to the final or the second to the final draft. Have someone else read it. Have them read it critically. Don't have someone read it that you know is good. Like, don't have your mom read it because you know mom's going to say, "Oh, honey, this is so nice. What a nice paper. You're so smart." Have somebody read it who knows what they're doing so that they can ask you questions, or they can say something like, "This sentence, I don't know, this doesn't make sense to me." If they say that, you need to rewrite the sentence. Okay, don't be defensive, but have somebody else proofread it. Let's see, I already said this. Keep your file, write the paper in Google Drive, or at the very least email it to yourself after a rewriting session. Okay, quotations, paraphrases, and plagiarism. We've discussed plagiarism. You need to cite anything that is a direct quote or a paraphrase of someone's idea that you're taking and capitalizing on. So you already know that, and I think I've instilled enough fear in you as far as plagiarism. And then conclusion for chapter 4 here. This is not an undergraduate paper. Write correctly. All right, let's take a break. I need a break.
Okay. Hey, Dad.
Yeah.
I just realized like 30 minutes ago I have a commitment at Calvary at 11:05. Would I have time to would I have time to drive to Calvary right now, or would we be done by 10:50?
We'll be done by 10:50.
We will. Okay.
Just warn you. And if we aren't, I'll just keep talking.
Got
When
it.
you have to leave, you leave.
Well, here's the thing. I can listen to you talking in the car. I have Teams on my phone.
Okay, that's all right. Yeah, don't worry about it. We'll be fine.
Okay.
Okay, so let's get started. I've got 9:14, so we'll get started at 9:30. Good. Back at 9:30. All right. Okay. Just remind me when you need to go. It's muted.
Your camera is frozen for me. If you turn your camera off and on again, it'll probably reset.
How's that?
Perfect.
Good. Good. It's still recording, so I had a situation, had two situations last semester where the recording failed and I had to go back and re-record the class, which is horrible. I have to go back and redo it, so without students. All right, we are in chapter 5. Chapter 5 of Wingle. See how long my voice holds out here. Questions of format. Okay, this is mechanics. Academia has rules. And you know, music has rules, right? There's recitals. You do a recital, you're supposed to dress a certain way, you're supposed to come out, you're supposed to bow a certain way, you're supposed to stand in a certain place at the piano if you're a singer. There's certain things you do, certain things you don't do. There's concert protocol. All of these things have it's like a religion. It is a form of religion. But academia, and certainly music, professional concert music or concert or classical music, all have protocols, and papers are no different. So the sign of proper training, acknowledgement of a higher, better, idealized order is all included in this idea of proper formatting papers. It is the process of, it's like a finishing school for young adults. You learn how to behave in a particular social situation. So that's how I want you to think of the mechanics of writing a proper academic paper. It sets a very high bar, and if you don't meet that bar, then your paper, your work is not considered of a quality, not considered adequate to be recommended or to be studied. Now, why do you even care about this? Well, if you're one of your goals is to go, if you're doing a master's and you're moving on up into the higher education, higher up in higher education, your stopping point could possibly and probably will be a doctorate. And once you have the doctorate, you could very well be teaching at a university at some point. And universities expect you to do research. Part of what you do is research, and you publish your research. And so you have to know how to get into those I don't know, markets, for a better word. You have to know how to handle yourself. So, and they're international, by the way. All of these norms are norms that you're going to find. Every country has its own little version of it, but it would not be unusual for you if you were if you're a musicologist and your specialty is the area of the Renaissance, and you decide that you want to specialize in Renaissance madrigals. There's a ton of them that have not been published. There are more songs from the Renaissance that haven't been published than have been published and performed. So there's this massive area of study that it's wide open. So you decide that you're going to go into Renaissance, vernacular, secular music, choral music, and you're teaching at University of Rhode Island, and you're asked to deliver your most recent paper at a symposium in France. And you may not have to go read it in French, but you will have to present the paper in a way that meets very stringent ideals on how that paper should be formatted and researched. And then you have to answer questions. So you deliver the paper, then people are going to pick it apart. So you want to make sure that you're striving for these highest levels right from the beginning. Arts and humanities have, like every area, have their own specialized rules. We don't use passive voice. Scientific papers do. So if you're a physicist, I'd say always use passive voice. But for our papers, you don't use passive voice. If you are an English major, you're using MLA. But you aren't an English major, you're a music major, and the standard for music in the United States is Chicago Manual of Style, which is Turabian, okay? And everybody refers to it as Turabian. So that's the expectation, and so when somebody's reading your paper, they expect to see footnotes, not end notes. They expect to see proper bibliography, and they expect to be able to make sense of that bibliography without having to work at it. So here are two basic principles as you produce anything, any writing of any substance. The first principle is you need to be consistent. So if you decide to if you decide to do Turabian, stick with Turabian. Which, by the way, do Turabian. You don't really have a choice. Make sure you have the latest copy. It doesn't change much from edition to edition, but there are some slight changes that you need to be aware of. And then, of course, get the Calvary Style Guide for the particulars there. Calvary updates their style guide about every 3 or 4 years. So you want to make sure you have the latest. I think our latest is 2019. So make sure you're looking at that. And then number one is be consistent. Number two, be logical. Your writing has to make sense to the reader. So as you're writing, you want to be thinking, how is the reader reading this? Is this making sense? Write clearly, write to the reader. The paper needs to be printed on one side only. You need to use standard US bond paper. Don't use colored papers. Don't use weird sizes. Don't use weird pounds. 20-pound bright white is normal. The stuff that you find in a printer, school printer, or on a Xerox machine. That's the standard. The page format, Turabian has standard margins. Use the standard margins. Your computer, your word processor, Microsoft Word, if you're using it, is probably already set up for standard margins. So you don't have to give a lot of thought to that. But if you've been dinkering with your margins, make sure you reset them for standard margins as described in Turabian. Also, the Calvary Style Guide, it's very, very specific on how you how you format your paper. Fonts, critical. Fonts. You can see Turabian. Turabian will tell you how to use fonts. They'll tell you to match the fonts that are in printed books. Generally speaking, you want to use Times or New Times Roman. I prefer New Times Roman. That's my default font. There are others, but the thing is that you may like other fonts, but these papers are written. People read a lot of papers, and changing fonts can get fatiguing. So just write in the same font that everybody else is writing in. You don't want to think creatively in these areas. You want to follow the precedents. But New Times Roman is fine. I'm perfectly happy with that. My notes are in New Times Roman. They aren't always, actually, no, they're in Arial today. Okay, well, stick with New Times Roman. Point size, you're going to do 10, 11, or 12. For me, use 12 because I have old eyes. I need a larger point size. But think in terms of readability over time. It's not just reading the first page, but if you're writing a 12-page paper, you need to have something that's readable. Spacing, to double space. I'm sure you understand that. Double space. Block notes, footnotes, and bibliography should all be single spaced. So if you're, and we'll talk about quotations here in a second, but if you're offsetting a quotation in the body of the paper, that's single spaced. You know what I'm talking about? Okay. So double space, double space, double space, and then you have a big long quote, and you set it off in a block. That's single space. Then you go back to double space. Let's see. Left-hand justification only. The reason you use left-hand justification only in a paper is because, let me see if I can find some. Okay, so left-hand justification is the margins line up on this side, but they don't line up on this side. You can do justification is where your ending letters are falling. Okay, so you can do right and left justification so that all these letters are on this line and all these letters are in this line. The reason you do use left justification, the reason you don't use right justification is because the way you get to right justification is the computer changes the spacing of each letter to get the line to fit so that it's justified on both ends. And the problem with that is that you change the spacing within words. Again, it makes it difficult to read when you're reading 12 or 14 or 15 pages. So don't do right justification. I think. Okay, so here is a textbook, page of text. If you can see it. There we go. Okay, this page here, that is right and left justification. So both sides line up. Don't do that. Just left. It's very pretty for a textbook, but not good for paper. Page numbers. Here's everything you wanted to know about page numbers. The title page is unnumbered. The first page of the text is page number 1, and it is numbered. Use Arabic numbers, not Roman numerals. If you are not using a title page and the title appears above the text on the first page, that is page 1, but you do not number it. In this case, put a title page on your paper. Okay, everybody gets a title page, put a title page, and do the title page according to Calvary's style guide. Title's right there, specific place in the paper. All the information you need on that is there. Your name's on there. When I correct papers, I take I turn the first page over and don't read who wrote it. Of course, I know who's writing it for this class. But if I'm doing a class and I have 15 students in it, I turn the first page over so I don't see who wrote it. And I correct the paper because I don't want to hear the student's voice. I'm trying to hear the voice of the paper. Okay. Place numbers in the top margin, one double space above the top line of text, either in the upper right-hand corner or in the center of the page. So number at the top. Include the numbers through the whole paper, including appendices, endnotes, and bibliography. And that's so we can refer to certain pages and the page number's already there. So especially for grading, I can go on page 3, you do this. Or in the bibliography, if you have a bibliography that's 2 or 3 pages long, I can say, go to page 17. It's the second page of your bibliography. I don't have to say that, I just say go to page 17. You can single staple the upper left-hand corner. That's the only place you can put a staple. Paper, upper left-hand corner, staple, or use a plastic cover. Both of those are acceptable. In this case, you're going to submit your paper through Canvas. But as we've seen with Canvas, Canvas blew up last week, and we lost for over a day and a half all of the work that everybody had done this semester, all the grading, everything was lost. And that was a Canvas issue. Canvas caused it. But the problem is that can happen. So always keep copies of everything you do. You know that, but I'm just reminding you so that it's been verbalized. Formats for quotations. If it's a short quotation, anything less than 2 sentences, anything less than 2 sentences, than 2 full sentences, integrated in the body of the text and use quotation marks. It must be quoted exactly, and the ending mark follows whatever punctuation is at the end of the sentence or the end of the section. Quotation marks, quoted exactly. Block quotations. If you have 3 to 10 lines, 3 to 10 lines, you set off in single space and indent into a block quotation that quote, but you do not use quotes. No quote marks. Instead, you indent it, set it off, single space it in a block piece of text. Okay? There's no reason to quote it because that's just redundant. Ellipses. Ellipsis is the omission from a quote, and you must use an ellipsis if you do that. So if you have a quote and it's, let's say it's, you have a passage that's 5 sentences long, but you only want 3 of those sentences, but the 2 sentences you don't need are right in the middle of the quote. You have to notate that you've omitted something, and you use an ellipsis. An ellipsis is 3 dots. So you have text, 3 dots, and then the text starts up again. Or if it's at the end, it might be a quote, and then you leave off half the sentence, and you put dot, dot, dot. Okay? That dot, dot, dot says, what it tells me and tells the reader is that there is more to this quote that was not included. If you are worried about the quote being taken out of context, go back and check the original document. Make sense? So by putting in the ellipsis, it tells the reader that not everything was placed into this quote. So if you have a beginning and end to a quote and something is missing in the middle, you need to put ellipses so we know we can go back and check it if we want to. Additions. If you must add something to a quote, use square brackets. So you're not going to use the parentheses, but you use, that's what those squares are for in your keyboard. Okay, that's for additions. So you might have a quote that you decide you need to make a comment about. Your comment comes into the square brackets. Okay. The use of the word sick, it's actually not a word. S-I-C. Well, it is a word. It's Latin for thus, thusly, thus. Sick means if you've ever seen a quote and then at the end of the quote it has SIC. SIC means this is the way it appeared in the source. Okay, the reason you use it is if the source misspells a word or okay, let's say you're talking about, here's an example. Orlando di Lasso. Okay, some books will say di Lassus and add the S on. And if you've been writing a paper about or de Lasso, if you're writing a paper about him and you've been saying de Lasso all the way through the paper, and then you get to a quote and the quote says de Lassus, you don't change de Lassus to de Lasso. Instead, you put de Lassus sic, S-I-C. Or let's say that there is a grammatical error in the quote, but you didn't make it. You put SIC after the quote. Make sense? Okay. Bibliography in footnote form. There is some variation in how you do footnotes and endnotes. Stick with the Calvary Style Guide and the Turabian. Be consistent, and we use, of course, footnotes. So use footnotes. Calvary even allows for a modified Turabian, and I would allow you to do that in an undergraduate. It looks a lot like MLA. I would allow you to do that in an undergraduate paper, but not a graduate paper. Stay with footnotes and do proper form. So when Calvary says you can do Turabian in several different styles, stay with the footnotes. Wingles, page 74 to 86, has a whole section on footnoting. I won't go over that, I'll let you read it. Author date system of citation. There's a fundamental difference. Instead of footnotes, it places the text in brief parenthetical citations. That's the one that they'll talk about. Again, we use footnotes. Format issues related to writing about music, and we'll talk about this a lot more in 7 and 8. But right now, stylistic periods, capitalizing. 20th century is a stylistic period. Modern era, no, not modern era. Renaissance, stylistic period. Medieval period, stylistic period. Middle Ages is a stylistic period if you choose Middle Ages over medieval. Make sure those are capitalized. Centuries are always spelled out. Do not put C-E-N-T period like I do in my emails to people or my notes. Spell out century, C-E-N-T-U-R-Y, when you're saying 16th century. And of course, in century is not capitalized unless it becomes a proper name. 16th century is capitalized. Fall is not capitalized. Fall semester is capitalized, right? So if I'm writing an email to someone and I say, we generally teach that class in the fall, that's not capitalized. But if I say, we will be teaching that class fall semester 2020, that's capitalized. That's an actual semester. Musical works, you italicize musical works. Italicize musical works if you're writing about musicals and you write about Wicked, you're writing about the musical Wicked, Oh, what's the latest musicals? Wicked's old. Let's say Frozen. Okay, let's say Frozen. So you're writing about Frozen. Frozen is italicized. If you're writing about a song from Frozen, that's in quotes. Okay. But normally musical works are italicized. If you're going to make a mistake on a musical work, italicize it. Okay. Let's see. Chapter 6. Yeah, I'm going to get into chapter 6 here because we have time. If we were in class right now, I'd tell everybody to go run around the building once, but okay. Yeah, there's a lot more in chapter 5 to formatting. Go back and read it. Chapter 6, other kinds of writing projects. Okay, chapter 6 is about some of the stuff we've already done. Now that you've done it, and of course you've handed it in, now we can talk about the proper way to do it. Actually, we've talked about some of that, but it's worth going over this. So Wingle has some great insights in writing projects other than research papers. Let's see, plagiarism. My note here, don't do it. Don't do it ever. It's easier. It's easy. Look, it's easy to cut corners with cut and paste, but now it's just as easy to find it. We have in Canvas, we have an add-on where I can take a paper, you submit the paper, I click a button, and Canvas checks it for plagiarism. It takes all of 5 seconds. So it's just don't plagiarize. Seminars. Okay, you have a seminar presentation. Your presentation, we're going to call it a seminar presentation. As I've said before, when you write a paper, a scholarly paper, and if you go on for a doctorate or you go on to teach in a university, at some point you may have the opportunity to deliver a paper. I actually delivered a paper on music appreciation or music appreciation symposium when I was in undergraduate school. So it can even happen in undergraduate school. But this is how you do a seminar or a seminar presentation. This is how you're going to do your presentation. Be yourself, be enthusiastic, make it clear that you love your topic. Otherwise, you shouldn't be writing on it. So you want to write about something that interests you. And most importantly, be prepared. Know what you're talking about. When you deliver a paper, and that paper, let's say 12-page paper, and you've been researching it and you labored over it and you wrote it, at that particular time and place, you are probably the expert in the room on what you're writing about. So you want to make sure that you are treating it that way. So the whole presentation process might be a little off-putting to you. If you were a student at Calvary, an undergraduate student at Calvary, you had to take the speech and class and you had to stand up and talk in front of people. And if you took other classes from me, I've had you do the same thing. And it gets easier. The more you do it, the easier it gets. It's not a natural thing to do at the beginning. You will have opportunity to deliver these papers. Your paper, I have something on my glasses. Your paper, it's possible to read your paper a lot of times at a symposium. I would tell you that you want to avoid that if you can, because that's pretty dry. Some people do it. I wouldn't. What you want to do is do a talk based on your paper. Your talk should have the same DNA, it should be the same genetic material, but it doesn't have to be a direct quote of your paper. It should be a discussion of your research. Time is limited for your presentation, so be prepared for a question and answer time afterwards, and remember, you're the expert. In our case, your presentation, let's see, I have multiple presentations. Your presentation is 15 to 20 minutes. If it goes longer than that, I'm not going to be too worried about it. But then we're going to open up the time for questions. So you're going to come up and talk about your research. You're going to deliver your presentation. That's going to be 15 to 20 minutes. Then we're going to allow 5 to 10 minutes for questions and discussion. That's in addition to the 20-minute presentation. So be aware that you may have to answer some questions, and that's normal for paper delivery. As far as organizing the presentation, it's best to present off an outline, draw up a real clear outline, and you want to prepare that outline for flexibility, so that if you need to take something out or add something in, you can do that. And for this class, obviously, you already have an outline as you're writing your paper, but you may want to, as you write your paper, you may want to do a separate outline for your presentation. It should be, think of your presentation as reflecting your paper, but it should not just be an edited down version of your paper. Flexibility is key. I was asked to do a Calvary Chapel, to teach at a Calvary Chapel one time. And something, let's see, what happened was, they said, we need you to do a half-hour teaching. I said, okay, great. So I prepared a 30-minute presentation. Then we had chapel began, we had the music, and then we had announcements. And the announcements, there was one announcement in particular that went on forever. So by the time everything was done, I had a 10-minute presentation. So I had prepared a half-hour presentation, and with all the stuff that I would put in a presentation, all the Bible quotes and all the examples and all the stories, and then the punchline at the end to try to get my point across, and to do it in a way that would hold the attention of a bunch of students at Calvary. So to go from having a 30-minute presentation to being told, as I start my presentation, that if you could just keep it at 10 minutes. Okay. It's one of the reasons I don't do Calvary Chapels anymore. So that was unsettling, to say the least, and I did what I had to do. That's not going to happen in our class, but at some point that will happen. You just go with the flow. If you have to cut it down to 10 minutes, you do a quick edit in your brain. The better prepared you are, the more likely you are to survive the drastic editing that you have to do for your presentation. Rarely are you going to be in a situation where they ask you to deliver a half-hour paper, and just before you start, they say, hey, the next speaker can't be here, so you actually have a whole hour. Generally, that doesn't happen. If it does, you're not obligated to go beyond the half hour that you said you'd prepare. So let's see. That was step 2. Step 3: time your presentation. And ask yourself, how can I bring this paper in on time? You want to, ideally, you don't want to go over the allotted time. So give the presentation, time it, Sometimes if timing is very critical, I actually put in my paper where I should be. So I'll say at the 5-minute mark, I should be here. At the 10-minute mark, I should be here. And that gives me some guidelines to stay within so that I don't, it helps keep me on track. Step 4, recorded examples. Use those judiciously. And I don't mean don't use a lot of them. Do use them judiciously, correctly. Practice with your recordings. I've had undergraduate kids do presentations, and they're supposed to do a 15-minute presentation. I had one kid get up and go, they talked for 5 minutes and said, now here's the excerpt I want to play, and it was a 10-minute excerpt from an opera. So a 15-minute presentation is not 5 minutes of talking and then punch the button and run an opera for 10 minutes, okay? So you understand that, I know, and I don't expect that from you. But if you're going to use recordings, hone down the part of the recording that you actually want us to hear. So sometimes it might be 2 or 3 or 4 minutes. Usually, if you're playing something for us, 30 seconds is a pretty long time. So I don't want to put a hard and fast rule on the length of recordings. Just make sure they're correct, they're used wisely, and you don't use them to pad your presentation. It's best, I'm assuming, if you're doing presentations, I'm assuming that you're going to either have those or doing recordings. I'm assuming you're going to have the recording either on your computer or your laptop, or that you're using YouTube. If you have them in your laptop, queue them up so they're ready to go. If you're using YouTube, if you're going to use 5 or 10 recordings, for instance, let's say 10 recordings, open up 10 windows, do 10 YouTube pages, start the recording so that we can get beyond the Aflac commercial at the beginning, or whatever the commercial is of choice. Right now it's a bunch of political commercials. Get beyond the commercial, hit pause, have that recording ready to go. If you're going to play from this part of the recording to that part of the recording, make sure you put in your notes that I'm going to play from marker 1 minute 30 seconds to marker 1 minute 57 seconds. Put that in your notes and have it queued up and ready to go. So all you have to do is click, open, play. And when you're done, you close it and you go to your next, whenever you're ready for your next recorded example. Does that make sense? That way you're imposing on your audience. If you have to jump around on YouTube and find stuff and queue it up and get through those awful commercials, it makes for poor presentation. So for this, remain professional. Step 5. It's better to use a detailed outline than to read your paper verbatim. Step 6. Handouts. If you're going to use handouts, make sure they're effective, concise, professional. Make sure they're appropriate for your subject. And prepare them just like you would prepare for your presentation or your paper. Step 7, multimedia is cool to use, but don't let it bog you down. If you're going to use multimedia presentation tools, things like Prezi are great tools for a presentation. I love Prezi, but it has a learning curve in terms of learning it. I don't know, if you don't already know Prezi, I don't know that this is the time to try to pick it up. You could. It's not that hard, but if you're going to do a presentation, you're going to do it more than once. It's worthwhile to do something like Prezi. I mean, you could do. You're probably comfortable with. What's the Microsoft presentation software?
PowerPoint?
PowerPoint, yeah. You can do PowerPoint. PowerPoint is fine. You know, if not old fashioned, it's certainly fine. PowerPoint, I don't have a problem with it. And if you're comfortable with the Prezi or something like that, that's all the better. Step 8, tone and approach. You already know what works and what doesn't work. You know what, you have instructors that have done some effective lectures and some instructors that aren't that effective. About preachers. Some preachers are effective in their preaching. Some preachers aren't. Just think about what works, and that's how you want to come across to your audience. So you want, in all of this, treat your presentation as a performance. I lead worship on Sundays. I'm a worship pastor at a church. When I lead worship, I try to be worshiping, and I teach this to students, but I teach worship leading. But you need to, worship leading is a good analogy. When I lead worship, I always remember that it is a style of performance. It's not just performance. It is also worship. But worship leading is ultimately what we would normally internalize in terms of worship to God. We have to somehow externalize that. So there is a performance element to worship that we have to keep in mind. There is a performance element to doing a presentation that you need to remember also. So, okay, concert reports. Any questions so far? Okay. Concert reports. You've already done some program notes. We're going to talk about concert reports and program notes quickly here. The purpose of concert reports is to focus on the music and the musical style. It's not, this would be like, I went to see this concert and this is what happened. So that's what we're talking about. It's not a critical review of the performance, but you may want to discuss some performance practice or something unusual about the performance. Apply what you know about music and start your comments from what you know. Don't worry about what you don't know. Talk about what you do know. That's the same thing with your master's oral exam, by the way. With orals, we're not worried about what you don't know. We're worried about what you do know. You can, if you're doing a concert report for this class, you'd want to connect with whatever that you're writing about from the concert, connected to something that we're working on in class. Research the pieces, make intelligent comments, basic info in the first paragraph when you write it. So we haven't had to write a concert report in here, so I'm not going to hang on that too much, but it is in the Wingle. Program notes. We did write program notes. The purpose of a program note is to increase the reader's understanding of what they're hearing, the audience's understanding. So who is the audience? You want to write to your audience as much as possible. Do not write down to them. Assume they are smart enough to figure things out. So I did in a recital one time, I did the Sonnets of Michelangelo, Sonnets of Michelangelo by Benjamin Britten. And at the time, Michelangelo was, amongst other things, he was the poet laureate for whatever city state he lived in. Michelangelo was a true Renaissance person, true Renaissance man, and he was a poet amongst other things. So he wrote these sonnets, and he wrote these sonnets to his boyfriend. And that's not, I didn't put that in my program notes. I didn't think that was appropriate, but I did write about Michelangelo and relationship that inspired him to write these. And somebody came up to me afterwards, somebody I knew from church. And this was a woman who had the previous week told me that she shot a deer and drugged the deer back to her house and then proceeded to gut and dress it. Okay, so she had never been to a concert before. And she came up to me afterwards and she said, wow, Michelangelo must have really had it for that girl. And I just smiled and I said, yeah. I had program notes and I had the translation of the texts and the notes, and it was an interesting interchange, and it was cool because she came to see this concert she would have never not have seen otherwise, but it was the program notes that allowed her to even understand what the original Italian was actually saying. So program notes are important. Okay, program notes. Research. Include something interesting. So if you're writing about a piece, you're doing program notes, write about a piece to an audience that might be less sophisticated, and allow them to enjoy the piece. But also include something that might pique the interest of, like, a professor that's attending or a musicologist that's attending. So our students tend to do this pretty well, so that in program notes on a piece, you're writing generally about the piece, and then you include something really interesting that even a really well-versed musician would say, wow, that's cool, I didn't know that. I still, to this day, I'll be studying something, maybe I'm working on for instance, this afternoon I'll be teaching music history 1, which is, everything up to Baroque. And as I'm preparing for that, I'll come across pieces that I haven't heard before, or I'll read about some idea that I haven't considered before. And it's like, wow, that's cool. That's what's so neat about teaching, is that I get to continue to study this stuff and get paid to do it. And it's cool when you can speak to 2 or 3 levels of audience. The old Bugs Bunny cartoons are great. The Bugs Bunny cartoons from the 40s and the 50s, and the some of the new cartoon features that have come out from Disney Studios and from Pixar will be writing typically to a younger audience, and then they'll throw in things for the parents, because they know the parents are there with their little boy or little girl. So they'll be writing the movie or the story maybe for a 7 or 8 or 10-year-old, and then occasionally bring in something interesting or funny that only an adult's going to get. I love that when that happens in an animated movie or a children's movie or program notes. So keep that in mind. You have to work within limits on program notes. A record jacket is only so big. A CD booklet is only so big. If you're hired to write notes for a CD, they will tell you have to have it within this number of words. That can get difficult, but just keep it interesting. You don't have to write about everything that you know about a piece. Just write something interesting about the piece. Special problems. Okay, early music. There are challenges to writing about early music, which include things like the temperament, the tuning temperament, maybe how do you write about an isorhythmic motet? How do you write, if you remember Thalia and Kollur, the repeating rhythms and melodies that happen in motets? But you want to bring some of those things into because you can't hear that usually. If you're doing a piece by let's say Michaud, and you have some repeating rhythmic figure, to mention that in the program notes makes perfect sense, because in general, the average listener won't be able to pick up on that. Or the way of cantus firmus works, or the way an ostinato works. The other stuff that you have to deal with early music are things like instruments. We tend to think of medieval and Renaissance instruments as being inferior. That couldn't be farther from the truth. Medieval instruments could be very highly refined at the time, but they were writing for different kinds of music, and the instruments that were available were the instruments that composers were writing for. So quite often a piece by a composer makes perfect sense on an old instrument and might have less resonance with the audience when played on a newer instrument. So a clavichord, for instance, is different than a piano. So a clavichord is the hammer comes down, hits the string, and then it stays on the string. So it has a muting effect. So you can't you can't hear a clavichord in anything other than a small room. They only work in small rooms. That's why we don't use them in concert. Harpsichord, on the other hand, we do use. Harpsichord plucks the string. It's got a quill, and it plucks like you would pluck a guitar string. But these are very specific instruments, and the music written for those instruments have a very specific sound that I think is superior. When you hear an instrument, when you hear a song or a piece of music performed on the instrument that was written for, I think you're experiencing the best you can of that of what that piece has to offer. So those are the kinds of things. So if people were, now that doesn't mean you can't perform Bach. You know, Bach never wrote for the piano. Even though the piano was invented shortly before he died, Bach didn't write for the piano, and yet we hear Bach performed on the piano all the time. Now, it's important that if you're playing Bach on a piano, that you're adhering to certain Baroque performance practices. And it's perfectly fine to do Bach on a piano. But it's worth noting when somebody decides to do Bach on an instrument that Bach would have written for, that that's the case, and that the piece sounds uniquely different than what it would on a piano. And those are types of things that you can bring up in your program notes. Transitions, arrangements, and additions. Again, if I were doing program notes for Messiah, I would be sure to include that Messiah, that Handel didn't put tempo and dynamic markings in his music, and that was left up to the conductor, or left up to whoever was doing the performance. And that typically we do the Schirmer edition of Messiah. All that stuff is editorial. All those markings are editorial, and it has come to define what Messiah should sound like. You might want to bring that up in program notes and just say, remember that the tempi and dynamic levels are not Handel's, but are an extension of the Schirmer edition. We're using the Schirmer edition, so people know. Because different editions make different assumptions. Recent music, you have to understand modern music, modern era music, in the context for which it's written. And you can't take 19th century harmonic practices and apply it to 20th century music and get anywhere with it. So just be aware of that. Familiar repertoire has certain challenges. There are the war horses out there. If you're writing about the 1812 overture, what can you write about it that hasn't already been said? But try to find something unique about the performance you're doing. Maybe you're using real cannons out on the lawn in front of the auditorium that you're performing it in, whatever, because that does happen sometimes, very cool performances. And then, of course, text and translations. Italian is much, much harder to translate because of all the idioms in it, but German is easy, French easier than Italian. Essay examinations. Okay. When you're writing for an essay, my master's work culminated in an oral exam. The doctorate culminated in written exams. The doctoral work, the exam was over a 1-month period and consisted of 24 hours of proctored testing. So part of the exam, 3 or 4 hours of the exam was a sit-down theory exam one Saturday, and then the next Saturday we had a 3 or 4 hour sit-down exam for history. One was theory and one was history. Okay, so and then all the rest of the questions, you would go up and they would have a manila envelope, and they would say, okay, there's 7 questions in the envelope. Do you want a 1 hour, a 2 hour, or 4 hour question? And I'd say, well, I've got 2 hours. Why don't you give me a 2 hour question? They'd open the envelope, hand me the 2 hour question, and I would sit in a proctored room and write my answer. Okay. So, essay examination. The purpose of an essay is to see if you understand and grasp the core of the material. Preparing for an essay exam. Usually, a professor is telling you what they want you to answer in the essay. I just had an essay assignment for my music history class. And I have 14 kids in the music history class. I laid down exactly what I wanted in the essay. And then I gave them the essay question. And 13 of the kids wrote about the essay question and gave me back exactly the information I'd given them. And the 14th kid who didn't watch the lecture went to Wikipedia, copied the information, and rewrote it in her own words and plugged that in there. And it wasn't even on the same planet. And so listen to what a professor says. They're usually telling you the answers to the things they're going to ask you. Certainly the things they find important. At the end of your time at Calvary on the Masters, you will have oral exams. You'll have one big oral exam. It's 3 hours long. Listen to the stuff I'm saying, because that's the stuff that ends up in the exam. It's the stuff that I find that's important. And we can talk more about the oral in this class if you want to. Orals, maybe I can give you an example of some orals questions. But whether it's a written exam, a written essay, or oral exam, you want to do 3 things. You want to read the question or understand the question, outline your answer, and then give your answer. So in the case of an essay question, read the question. This is what I do. Read the question, jot down your ideas, outline your answer, reread the question, because a lot of times you answer incorrectly because you misread the question. Reread the question, then write your answer. For oral exams, same thing. Listen to the question. Maybe we repeat the question again, then write. Then maybe you want to jot down the question, and then jot down your ideas on the question, and then you answer your oral. You give the oral question, the oral answer. With an oral exam, you can take time to formulate your thoughts before giving your answer. I mean, not a half hour, but if you want to spend a few minutes organizing your thoughts, that's fine. And then when you're ready, you give your answer. So that's how you do oral exam. Common errors. There's more about common errors in the Wingle as we get into some of the other chapters. But the biggest error in an essay exam absolutely is the misreading of the question. So more people get questions wrong because they misread the question and didn't answer what I was asking for the question. Maybe they didn't know the answer, but that's what I found. It's misreading or misunderstanding the question. Okay, we're going to conclude here with this. When you do a lecture recital, we don't do lecture recitals at Calvary. You could do, if for your master's recital, if you want to do a lecture recital, you can. It might be fun. They take they're a lot of work. They take a lot of research, but they're a lot of fun. So I had to do a lecture recital for the doctorate, and I did it on starting an opera company. So I talked about forming a 501c3, how to handle the tax situation and accounting, how to assemble a group of people that could be involved in it. And then I brought in an opera company that I'd started, and they did little bits and pieces of an opera work. It's a lot of fun. So you might want to consider a lecture recital for your recital at Calvary. All writing, presentations, seminars, anything you're doing at an academic level need two things: solid research and professionalism. And if you do solid research and present it professionally, you got it. Okay, I'm going to stop there for today. Open it up for questions. Question.
I don't think I have any. I know about the oral exams. I'll probably have a billion questions eventually, but like, I don't know. It's healthy to feel intimidated by it, right?
Oh yeah, yeah.
Good.
If you aren't feeling intimidated by orals, then you don't understand what an oral exam is. Okay, but I will briefly tell you what it is. The oral exams work this way. We have 4 people in the room. We have 3, this is how we've done it in the past. 3 music, faculty, professors. And usually it's Dr. Ahn, myself, and Mrs. Christopher. And then we have a 4th person, 4th professor from the university that is not a music person. So it might be somebody from the English department, or somebody from the Bible and theology department, or could be somebody from the administration. And they're there to ask questions of you too.
Why?
Because at the master's level, we expect you to be able to talk about music beyond just what you've had in your classes.
Sure. So they'll ask something. Okay, got it. Do we get to pick that person, or does the faculty chair pick that person?
Generally, we let you pick the person. Okay. The last orals exam I did, the person had picked Dr. Bittner. And so Dr. Bittner would come in, and his area is history. So he would come in, he came in, I can't remember any of his questions off the top of my head. I write everything down. But he might ask a question like this. Christopher, you had Western Civ with me. And during Western Civ, we studied the Age of Enlightenment. How would you tie in the music of the time from the Age of Enlightenment to the things that we talked about in that class? Okay. Now, this is what you need to know for orals. You need to know everything that you needed to know to pass your undergraduate theory and history classes. Okay?
Got it. I've heard that. Yeah.
Yeah. So know general theory, general history. I would tell you that you don't want to wait until the night before, but this is actually, it's your book, Christopher, A History of Western Music. I took the jacket off so I didn't destroy it. Okay, so History of Western Music, and that's what I'm teaching right now, this afternoon. Anything in that book is fair game. We use Benward for our theory. Anything in Benward is fair game.
French 6, all that. Yeah.
I promise you, I guarantee you, I will ask you to spell an augmented sixth chord in a particular key and resolve it correctly. That is one of the questions. So you need to know your German, Italian, and augmented sixth chords, which I would shudder to have to do that right now. If somebody were holding a gun to my head, I'd probably try the Italian six and resolve it correctly. But you need to understand German, Italian, and French augmented sixth chords. You need to understand how to spell them, where they are in the key, and how to resolve them once you have them written down. It'll go like this. Spell a German augmented sixth chord in the key of C and resolve it.
I can give you Italian or French off the top of my head. Don't
And
know
then
German.
You stand at the board, you stand at the board, and you spell it out. If you're a piano major, you might get a German or French augmented sixth. If you are a vocalist, we'll have mercy on your soul. We'll probably give you like an Italian sixth in the key of F.
That's prejudice. Okay, wait. Okay, so
we only have 3 hours.
Key of C. I know Italian would
Don't
be.
worry about it.
I want to try. It's been years.
Right, I don't know. Let me finish because I'm in this plane right now. Okay, so you need to know your theory. You need to know your history. Then you need to know any graduate course that you had. We get to ask questions. Now, your graduate courses are all going to be taught by Dr. An, by me, or by Unchong Christopher. Maybe somebody else, but generally that's it. So, for instance, anything we talk about in this class can end up in the orals. If you take 20th century music history or 20th century music theory from me next semester, anything from those classes can end up in your orals. So you're responsible for general music theory and history and any specific master level courses that you take. And
that almost makes me not want to take 20th century theory, because that would probably be the worst thing to get quizzed on.
20th century theory, I'm sorry, it's very logical.
I know.
Very methodical.
Yeah.
So nothing to it.
I've read the textbook for it.
Which one?
The one that you were using when Bethany Franklin was doing it, because I would help her with her homework.
Ooh, can you give me a copy of it?
I don't own a copy. I saw hers.
Okay. All right. So anyway, that's everything. Question?
None.
Good. Sammy and Catherine, if you have questions, just email me. I'll try to get those answered. Otherwise, we're finished.
All right. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you.
Bye.
Okay, bye-bye.